Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Paul Ludacka with me. Paul is a wealth management advisor, an avid Vikings fan, and in constant pursuit of becoming the best individual he can, father and husband, and I'm super excited to share Paul's story. So, Paul, thanks for being on today.
Thanks, Phil. Excited to be here.
You bet. So to kick off your story, talk a little bit about growing up and a pivotal lady that you get the opportunity to move into and the relationship you have with her.
Yeah, for sure. So quick background, my dad, I love my dad, but like many men, my dad made really bad choices. So my biological father was a drug and alcohol addict. Spent most of his adult life at the Open Door Mission. In fact, my earliest childhood memory was my biological father leaving.
Wow.
And like many young men, all I wanted was a dad.
Yeah.
Wrestle with, play football with, play catch with. And they say, sometimes be careful what you wish for because you might get it. So my mom remarried when I was 8, almost 9 years old. And unfortunately, my stepfather was a very abusive, very toxic alcoholic. And so I grew up in a very abusive, very negative environment. Went through a lot of things as a young man, frankly, that most people could never imagine, let alone want to live through.
Yeah.
And so when I was 14 years old, my mom and stepfather started charging me $200 a month rent. And I did that for a couple months. And then I looked around and said, man, this environment is not conducive to the man I want to be. And if I'm going to be self-sufficient, I want to be self-sufficient in an environment where I can thrive, not where I'm literally worried about my day-to-day survival. And so at the age of 14, I made a very mature decision and I left home. And I moved in with my best friend and his mom. And by the grace of God, she treated me as her own. They took me in, gave me stability, showed me what a family should be like. And I discovered at the age of 16 that she was actually a financial planner for 38 years. 38 years. So it's funny, we'd come home every day and every day we'd get there at 3:30 or whatever, and she'd have a package of Fritos and a chicken patty sandwich waiting for us. And so we'd eat and hang out with her for a bit, and then we'd go do, what teenage boys do. And one day I came home, we were 16, and I looked around her big, beautiful house. She's always dressed nice. She drove a Mercedes, but as I like to say, kids spell love Time. And all I knew was every day when I'd come home, Miss Bikani was there. And so I'm looking around her house and I'm like, what do? Do you sell drugs? And she said, no, honey, I'm a financial planner. I said, well, what does that mean? And she said, I help my clients plan for their children's education. I help them plan for their own retirement. And God forbid, I help them plan if anything, God forbid, were to happen to them prematurely. And then she literally asked me a question that changed the whole trajectory of my life. Yeah. And she asked, honey, if you had to guess what percentage of Americans retire at 65 with more than 40,000 a year of annual income? And Phil, if I asked you, if you had to guess what percentage of Americans retire at 65 with more than 40,000 a year of annual income, what would you guess?
20%.
That is our most common guess. Clients guess 20 to 30%. And sadly, it's 2.
Wow.
2%.
Yeah.
So I remember hearing that, thinking the same thing. Wow, this is the wealthiest nation on planet Earth, and 98% of us retire below the poverty line. But I also remember thinking, wow, that means someday if I become a financial planner, I can help 98 out of 100 people that I meet. And that's why I do what I do. So at the age of 16, I remember telling Miss Bikani, if I don't go on to play NFL football, then I'm going to become a financial planner. And so here I am today.
Well, you're physically built like you could have played NFL football. You're stacked, but I'm glad that you are in the financial advising world.
Well, and the cool part of that story, and thank you, the cool part of that story is one of my favorite life verses is Proverbs 16:9. And Proverbs 16:9 says, man makes plans for his life, but God directs his steps.
Mm.
And so if it was up to me, I would have been a professional football player, not a very good one. But thankfully, by the grace of God, he had a better plan for me.
Yes. So a question that makes me think of is, just the power in seeing somebody do something before you would, right? So you got to see a lot of the neat opportunities that came for Miss Vacanti, right? And what she could provide. So talk maybe a little bit about the motivation behind that for you to entertain that as a career opportunity.
Yeah, so concept of modeling, I think, is imperative. I have 5 kids, 4 bad boys, and 1 perfect little girl. And I remember friends and mentors often saying, more is caught than taught. Kids are going to watch how you behave. I love studying psychology for fun. And they say 90% of communication is nonverbal.
Wow.
So Miss Vacanti was one of the best human beings I've ever known, and so I wanted to be like her. So she provided that model. Now
Yeah.
nobody's perfect. I always give her a hard time. She's a sweet little lady, but she swears like a truck driver. So she modeled, 90% really positive stuff, but she also taught me how to swear. And, she was just a wonderful, like the most kind, generous, thoughtful person I've ever known. And so she taught me that by modeling. And go back, like, medieval times, one of the things I do with my 4 boys is I take them through raising a modern day knight. And so
Wow.
in medieval times, there was no question when a young man became a knight because they had a ceremony. He was a squire, and then he was an apprentice, and there was no question he is now a knight.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, how many young men in our world today, they don't know what's it mean to be a man. When do I become a man? So
Yeah.
many young men struggle. Is it when I have my first drink? Is it when I get in a fight? Is it when I move out? Is it when I have sex? Like all these wrong messages, they
Yeah.
don't know what it means to be a man. And so one of the things I've been intentional with my 4 boys is this is how we become a man. So I weekly mentor them, disciple them. We do Bible studies. We just hang out. We go fishing. We play cards. And I'm just very intentional about modeling for them what's it like to be a man, how to love your wife, how to treat a woman, open doors, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no thank you, yes please, all these little things, how to shake a hand, look someone in the eye.
Yeah.
Those are lost arts today. Men and women don't do that in today's culture.
Mm. You can hear the undertone of the how do you spell love, Time, in how you are doing that today.
Thank you.
So as you see this example and you're getting older, right? 16, you ask the question, you decide this is the career path I'm going to go down because the NFL didn't come knocking. So talk a little bit about how you end up getting involved with the firm and the start there.
Oh yeah, thanks. So yeah, the financial planning landscape has changed so dramatically in the 25 years since I started. And so if I'm anything, I'm intentional. Like I'm very intentional. I'm very driven. I love to plan. I would say the best plan is the one that works.
Yeah.
And so I was working full time. I was going to school full time, and I got most of my licenses when I was still in school. And if I did have electives, even in high school, I would take finance oriented classes.
Yeah.
Now, a quick sidebar to that, if I had to do it all over again, I would throw my finance degree away and I would get a degree in psychology because it's proven emotional decisions are 8 to 10 times more powerful than logical ones.
Yeah.
So I would take finance courses, I would get all my licenses. And so about my price say 6 months or so before graduating, maybe a little longer, probably 9 months, I made a list of the top 12 planning firms in Omaha. And so, Merrill Lynch, at the time, Piper Jaffray, Norwest Financial, which is now Wells Fargo, Northwestern Mutual, New York Life. So I made this top 12 list and I started interviewing with them. And
Yeah.
anyone in the financial planning industry knows, they spend so much time chasing candidates that when you have somebody come to you, that's a target rich environment.
Yeah.
So I would go through these interviews, and at the end of every interview, I would thank them for their time and then ask, with your permission, could I ask you a question?
Mm.
And it was interesting to see just how the tone shifted,
Yeah.
because it was very respectful. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate everything that you've asked, all the time you shared with me today. But do you mind, could I ask you a question? And even though I would say it in that fashion, 10 of the 12 people almost like got offended. They're like, who are you? You're this punk kid. Like, we ask the questions around here. You don't. Like, it was
Yeah.
all about them.
Yeah.
And so when they're like, sure, or, whatever, my question was very simple. Why should I start my career for the benefit of my clients and their family's future with you and your firm?
Mm.
And again, most of them were like, who do you think you are?
Right.
Like, at best, their answer was, because we're the best. And then
Yeah.
I would say, well, why are you the best? And they didn't have an answer. It was
Yeah.
just, some superlative. And I remember interviewing with Chuck Scanlon, who's the managing partner with Northwestern Mutual. And he said, Paul, because when you tell your clients this is the safest thing they and their families can do with their money, you can put your head on the pillow at night knowing this is the safest thing.
Mm.
And that gave me peace of mind. And then I'm a huge Ronald Reagan fan. I
Yeah.
love Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan would always say, trust, but verify.
Yeah.
So not only did Chuck tell me that, he now pulled out all these reports that showed Northwestern Mutual, only AAA rated company for financial strength in the entire industry, only company to pay a positive dividend every year since 1872. Two world wars, Great Depression, JFK, Martin Luther King, Vietnam, tech bubble, doesn't matter, positive rate of return. And I remember I studied Warren Buffett. I love quoting Warren Buffett. And he always says he has two rules to investing. Rule number one, don't lose money.
Good one.
Yeah. Rule number two, don't forget rule number one. So I remember Chuck sharing that with me and thinking, wow, not only does he say it, but he can reinforce it. He can back it up.
Yeah.
And so I went home that night, and it's funny because my wife, now wife, and I, at the time, fiance, we went driving around picking out our future dream home. Like, here's where we want to live. Here's where we want to raise our family. And I said, honey, today I'm making a business decision. And it's the business decision that's going to set the course for the rest of our life. I'm going to choose Northwestern Mutual. And
Yeah.
she's like, why? You have all these relationships at all these other places. They have nicer offices, or better trips, or more money. Why Northwestern Mutual? And
Yeah.
I said, because everybody in this industry talks about what's doing best for their clients. Northwestern's the only one that convinced me they always do what's best for their clients. And one of the core values that I've shared with my kids, that I model for my kids, that I reinforce with my team, is that actions reveal true beliefs. Don't listen to the words people say. Watch what they do, because actions reveal true beliefs.
Yeah. That's really good. So this makes me think of, making life choices, right? So many times we'll get a bunch of feedback from people, and sometimes those people have good intentions. Sometimes they don't know anything about the topic, but we trust them, so we ask their advice. But for you, what gave you that confidence that this was the right choice, even though your fiance at the time was saying, I don't know if I believe you. I don't know if this is the right choice.
No, fair enough. That's actually really funny. Well, a couple things. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Proverbs 13:20. And it says, he who walks with the wise will become wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm.
Yeah.
And so, up until that point, Miss Vicani and everybody else, I had consulted, like, what are the parameters that I should base this decision on? Because in my opinion, at that time, that was one of the most important decisions I would ever make in my whole life.
Yeah.
This wasn't a job. This wasn't a job. This was a career that I wanted to make for the rest of my life. And so I take that decision very, very seriously. Abraham Lincoln once said, if you gave him 5 hours to cut down a cherry tree, he'd spend 4 hours sharpening the saw. So I had spent a lot of time, consulting with mentors and people in my life that were very, very important. The other thing that was interesting about that dynamic, and I get emotional just talking about it, Miss Vacanti clearly wanted me to come and work with her.
Yeah.
And she basically, offered me $100,000 out of school, come work with her, someday run her practice. And that is an honor. And I was very grateful for that. But a couple things. One, I've been on my own for so long, and trust me, I should be like a drug addict in prison or something worse. But by the grace of God and the people he's placed in my life, I have been blessed way more than I deserve. I always say I'm a nobody from nowhere with nothing, but by the grace of God and the people he surrounded me with, I have been blessed beyond anything I'd ever deserve.
Yeah.
And at that time, I wanted to prove that I could do this not because of Miss Vacanti, but because I could do this on my own.
Yeah.
I was fiercely independent. Does that make sense?
It does.
And what's so beautiful about that now is, guess who my number one fan is? Miss Vacanti.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So she is my number one fan, love her like a mom. And I just wanted at the time to prove that I was successful, not because of Miss Vacanti, but because we did things the right way for the right reasons.
Yeah. So as I hear you talk about, making the decision and, hey, it's not a job. I wasn't just going to try this thing out, see how it went for a month or two, and then, maybe wish wash. No, I was picking a career. Like, this is what I was going to do. Talk a little bit about that idea and concept that you love, the burning of the boats. Like, this is what I'm here to do.
Yeah, I love it. So, legend has it that when Cortez and other explorers would travel to foreign lands, once they came upon shore, the first thing he would do is turn to his general and say, burn the boats.
Yeah.
Burn the boats. He'd issue one command, burn the boats. And the reason he did that is by burning the boats, failure was not an option. There was no retreat. There was no surrender. We were going to win or we were going to die. That's it. I'm a big Star Wars geek, and my sweet wife, God bless her, had never seen Star Wars when we started dating. And so with that, and now 4 boys, like I, introduced her to this whole new world. And we always joke as a family and as a team, one of my favorite quotes is Yoda: there is no try or try not. There is only do or do not. Well, I try my best, right? Try this. No, you don't try. You either do or you don't. Yeah. And so Cortez put his men in a position where you either win or you die.
Yep.
And so when I started this career, I remember distinctly in one of the first couple days of training class, there was a group of 10 of us. And one of the planners at the time, who's now one of my very best friends, came into the room and explained how 90-some% of us fail in the first 3 years.
Yeah.
And then he asked, and he went around the room and he said, hey, what's your probability of success? And first girl says 7%. Then he went to the next person. What's your probability of failure? The guy's like, over 90%. Goes around, gets to me. He says, what's your probability of success? I said, 100%. He's like, what do you mean? I said, failure is not an option. I will succeed or I will die trying. Period. End of story. So we just went into it with failure was not an option. No, the other thing I see lots of young people do that's a mistake is they outlive their income, this whole fake it till they make it. And I hate that.
Yeah.
So my wife, God bless her, she's a way better human being than I am. She was a neonatal nurse for 13 years. And so when we first got married, she was making 36 grand a year. And so we said, okay, we're going to live in such a way that we can survive on her $3,000 a month. It's not glamorous.
Yeah.
It's deferred, delayed gratification, but we're going to live off her 3 grand. And that took all the pressure off me to perform. And so whatever we made, I would put 50% into savings for taxes and 50%, towards our lifestyle. And what that ended up doing was exponentially move us forward.
Yeah.
And so we weren't reliant on my income. And I think clients picked up on that because here was this young guy. We always say we built our practice on we serve and we educate. We serve and we educate, because back to that statistic of 98% retiring below the poverty line, there is a desperate need in America for financial literacy. So, a lot of financial planners would say, oh, I'm only going to meet with them twice. And if they don't do something next, I'm moving on. Well, my typical client I'd meet with for 6, 7, 8 times, educating them before they did anything, because they could pick up that I didn't have the pressure to sell them. And then the beauty is, in our industry, average client financial planning relationship is something like 3 to 7 years. Well, it's hard to provide a lifetime of financial security in 3 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Our purpose statement since 1997 has been, Phil, if you choose to work with us, because it's your choice, if you choose to work with us, our goal, our purpose statement is that you and your family look back in 20 or 30 years and say, working with Ludacka Wealth Partners is one of the best decisions that you ever made. Yeah. So we live that purpose statement. I'm proud to share. Here we are 25 years later this year, and our client retention is 99.9%. Our clients never leave.
Yeah. That's so good. And as I hear you say that, once again, whoever's listening, if you're a business owner, if you're getting into a relationship, whatever, burning the boats and being, steadfast on what it is you're trying to accomplish, it doesn't mean that you didn't have to make pivots, right? It doesn't mean that it all went exactly smoothly like you had set out for it. No, along the way, there were certain adjustments that had to be made, but it was the idea that I know what the end result is, right? And I'm just going to figure out how to get there. Not, hey, it was just a straight line from A to B. No, right? But it was the idea that, hey, I'm going to end at B. I'm not going to turn around and head the other way.
Yeah. So I love that. We call those course corrections. Okay? So one of my best friends, he's a pilot. Another one of my best friends is a behavioral psychologist. And they often talk about how if you take a flight from LAX to Hawaii, that plane is off its optimal course 90 to 95% of the time.
Wow.
Now, I had other pilots dispute that, but here's why they said it's true. Either one, time delays with traffic patterns or just schedule.
Yeah.
2, load, weight, cross current, turbulence, pick it, for 100 reasons, that plane is off its optimum or original schedule. However, if passengers on that plane focused on the fact that that plane was, quote, off course 90 to 95% of the time, it'd be pandemonium, it'd be chaos. Yeah. And we always talk about what you focus on magnifies. So those passengers aren't focused on the fact that there's extra turbulence or they left 10 minutes late or whatever the schedule is. They focus on the fact that that pilot is a trained professional. They are going to make course corrections, and 100% of the time they'll land safely in Hawaii. And so that's how we look at life. Is life happens. Again, Proverbs 16:9, man makes plans for his life, but God directs the steps. So as life happens, we're constantly, to use your words, pivoting, to use my words, making course corrections. Yeah. And like another example of that, my oldest son, being from the background that I had, Phil, all I wanted to do was be a dad.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the dad I never had. And all I wanted was a son. And I know in today's world, that's politically incorrect. You just want a healthy baby. And I say, everyone wants a healthy baby. I want a boy. I want a boy that I could spend time with just like I wanted as a young man that I never had.
Yeah.
So when my oldest son, Jacob, was born, hours after he was born, the pediatrician came in and does all the reflex tests and shines a light in his eyes, just like, is standard. And he shines the light in my son's right eye and he says, And then he goes to his left eye. I'm like, whoa. What is, what does that mean? And he said, well, your son appears to have a mass in his eye. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, come here. So he shines a light in his left eye and it looks like red eye in a photograph. Then he goes to the right eye and it's like opaque, like a marble.
Yeah.
I said, what is that? And he says, well, your son appears to have a tumor in his right eye. I said, in his eye, on his eye, what do we do? And he said, oh, it's no problem. We'll just remove the eye. And I said, okay, well, then what do we do? Do we get him a prosthetic? I mean, what do we do? He's like, oh yeah, once the eye sets, the socket sets, we'll get him a prosthetic. And I said, okay, well, at what age does the eye set? And he said, generally by the age of 14. I said, well, what does my son do with one eye for the next 14 years?
Right.
And he said, just like it was no big deal. Well, he'll just wear a patch. And I said, what do you mean he'll just wear a patch? Like, this is my son.
Yeah.
And so I like to joke, my wife and I don't fight. We have intense moments of fellowship. Let's just say that me and that physician had a very intense moment of fellowship. Well, I share that story because, Phil, here I am. All I want to do is be a dad. All I want to do is be a dad I never had. The Lord blesses me with a son, and he's born blind in his right eye. My wife's devastated. She's bawling. She's crying. Typical parents were asking, why did this happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? This isn't fair. What did we do? And Phil, this is my Red Sea moment.
Yeah.
And what I mean by Red Sea moment is, a lot of people that don't believe in God say, well, if God exists, why don't we see miracles anymore? And I would counter by saying, we see miracles every day. You just refuse to acknowledge them.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, why don't I see the Red Sea parted? Why don't I see the dead raised? So this is my Red Sea moment.
Yeah.
So I love God. I love the Lord. And Jacob was born. We had that interaction with the pediatrician. My wife was, very upset. And finally, at the end of the day, she settled down. And I don't read my Bible every day, but I try. And I generally 4 to 5 days a week. And I always leave a bookmark in it. So I pull out my Bible and said, honey, let's just read God's word and see what it has to say. So my bookmark on December 27th, 2000, my son's birthday, was on John chapter 8. So I read out loud to my wife, John chapter 9, verse 1. And Phil, it says, Christ and his disciples were walking upon a path when they came upon a man blind since birth. So immediately, like, I'm getting emotional just reliving that now. Immediately, my wife and I, we lose it. Like, what are the odds? with God, 100%.
Yep.
100%. Verse 2 says, the disciples asked Rabbi, which means teacher, what sin has this man committed, or what sin has his parents committed, that he would be born in this condition? Again, Sarah and I are like, this is our life. Like, what do we do to deserve this? Why is Jacob? This isn't fair. I want to be a dad. Why does he have to be blind in his right eye? Why is this happening? Why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah.
And the power is in verse 3. In verse 3, Christ responds, this man has committed no sin, nor has his parents. He was born in this condition so that his life may bring glory to God. And Phil, I shut my Bible. I said, one eye, no eyes, one lung, doesn't matter.
Yep.
God's hand is on this child. He has a mighty plan and purpose for this child. And I release that to the Lord. And
Wow.
I could spend hours just describing the miracles that Jacob has lived through. 18 surgeries, his first 12 months, a lot, like all the things that he had lived through and done that you wouldn't believe. Miracle after miracle after miracle that just most people refuse to acknowledge.
Wow.
So that's my Red Sea moment.
Yeah.
And there's no question from that moment on, I believe in God, and miracles happen every day. Most people just refuse to acknowledge them.
That's so good. So a lady that's been referenced a couple times and has been, a certainly a gift in your life and many others is Sarah. Talk a little bit about how she comes into the story and at what phase of life she comes into the story.
Well, she is the story, right? She's the best thing to ever happen to me. So I'll back up, back to my best friend who I moved in with at 14. I started spending a lot of time with them when we were 11. So I would walk or ride my bike literally miles, because I lived clear across town, every morning to his house in the summer. So one morning we're sitting there, being dumb 11-year-old boys, and a couple of other guys walk into his house, and one screams, "Warcheck's babysitting Calabrettos," and everybody gets out and runs out the door. So I'm like, what just happened? So I go running, I catch up with my buddy, and I'm like, what's a Warcheck? And he goes, dude, you haven't met Sarah Warcheck. So I'm 11 years old. Like, I was not, you can tell even looking at me now, I was not a good looking 11-year-old. And so we go running down to Calabretto's house, and these three young boys come out, and I start wrestling with them, start, throwing a football around. I had like this zero interest in women, because frankly, they had zero interest in me. And I'm just having fun with these three little dudes. And all of a sudden, it was like a movie. Sarah Warcheck walks out on the patio, the wind hits her hair. And I'm like, oh my goodness. 11-year-olds are not supposed to look like that. So dude, like the minute I saw her, I had a crush on her.
Yeah.
So I've adored Sarah Warcheck since we were 11 years old. But she's a really good judge of character. And so she didn't date me till her 19. So Phil, if anything, I'm persistent.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm noticing a theme here. I'm noticing a theme.
Yeah, so 8 years, we go out with me, no, we go out with me, no, we go out with me, no. So thankfully, I had a lot of what we're talking about today, like I even love the concept of your podcast, who knew in the moment. As a family, as a practice, we talk about inflection points.
Yeah.
And inflection points are moments in our life when everything changes, where nothing's ever the same going forward. And two things as I just reflect on our time together today, which, by the way, thank you. This has been great sharing. I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
As I reflect on what we're sharing, often the worst things that happened in my life were the greatest blessings. Genesis 50:20 says, what man intends for evil, God will use for good.
Yeah.
And all the bad, quote, bad things that happened in my life, God has turned them into blessings. And they forged me into the man that I am today. Like, I look at what I went through as a child, and anybody would say what I went through as a child was toxic, was abusive, was inappropriate, should have never happened.
Yeah.
But it taught me the man that I did not want to be. It showed me who I did not want to be, and forged me into the man I am today.
Yeah.
A man who loves his kids, a man who spends time with his kids, a man who's intentional with his kids, completely opposite of what I grew up with. And then just prior to Sarah and I, we started dating, in fact, this month, May of 1995. And in February of 1995, I came to Christ.
Wow.
And I always say, Phil, like I wasn't a bad kid, but I did bad things. When I
Yeah.
left home at 14 with minimum supervision, living with another family, I thought it would be really great, but boundaries are healthy.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any. And the first Bible verse I ever memorized was beware, bad company corrupts good morals. First
Mm,
Corinthians 15:33.
yeah.
So, I was a stupid 14-year-old kid that just did stupid 14-year-old things. And so the reason Sarah didn't want anything to do with me is I was a bad boy.
Yeah.
I was a bad boy that did bad things that we wouldn't want any of our daughters to be associated with. But by the grace of God, which is a whole nother podcast, I came to Christ February 9th of 1995.
Wow.
And in May of 95, when Sarah and I reconnected after literally not seeing each other for almost 2 years, she kept saying, there's something different about you.
Wow.
Something different about you. There's something different about you. So that February 9th of 1995 was an inflection point that changed my life for all eternity.
Yeah.
In fact, the man that led me to the Lord, Daryl Scott, was the best friend I've ever had, my mentor. And we just celebrated on Friday 5 years of him going to heaven.
Wow.
I would give everything I could to spend one more hour with him, but thankfully I have all eternity to look forward to celebrating with Daryl, the greatest human being I've ever known.
Yeah. Well, and something I would highlight just in what you said there, and not everyone listening has a faith life, and I
Sure.
understand that, but I think something to highlight is, as you decide that this is a relationship that you want to have, with God and your faith, it's not that it becomes life is easy, right?
Yeah,
like it's not as if all of a sudden, hey, it's all pie in the sky and like, yep, now I'm
it's
good.
all
No,
rainbows and butterflies,
that's
baby.
right. That's right. No, it's like no life is equally as hard. Sometimes it gets harder, it seems like. But you have this solace and this comfort knowing, hey, there's this higher power that I'm attached with, right? And I think that's an important thing to highlight is yeah, Sarah noticed some things that were changing about you, but didn't mean that life all of a sudden just became easy for Paul.
No. And, if anything, faith just gave me perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the most important things. Like I just shared this with my kids yesterday. We're going through a study in James, book of James. It talks about, exalt or celebrate our trials because that forges us into the people that we are today.
Yeah.
And as you're going through that trial, it teaches you strength, it teaches you endurance, it gives you wisdom. And one of my favorite verses is Galatians 6:9. Do not lose heart in doing good, for in due time you shall reap if you do not grow weary. If you don't give up. The
Yeah.
Navy SEALs, their motto is never quit.
Yep.
You can't lose if you never quit. And so I often share with my kids, yes, there may be hundreds of people that have it better than us, but there are millions that have it worse.
Mm.
And one of the key lessons that Daryl taught me is pride is the father of all sin and selfishness is the mother.
Wow.
Well, it's hard to be prideful and it's hard to be selfish when you're focused on other people.
Yeah.
When you're focused on serving others, doing good for others, helping others, it's pretty hard to be prideful and selfish.
Yeah. That's really good. So that drives us back to what your business motto has been, right? Serving others, and talk about, growing a team. And I'll highlight to get to the end, and that the team will help us get there. But Paul has been named a top 20 advisor by Forbes in the United States, which is about the highest accolade that one can receive. And when you start in your business, you're a solo practitioner, like you're doing it on your own. Today, team of 14. So talk a little bit about the, I guess the transition from solo practitioner to team leader and the growth of the business that's come.
I appreciate that. So as I said, I was a nobody from nowhere with nothing, and I would have never imagined in a million years we've been as blessed as we have. the men and women we get to work with, who are blessed and honored to serve. I have been blessed way more than I ever thought, imagined, or deserved.
Yeah.
So, my first year in the career, I had a pretty good year. Got off to a decent start. And one of my mentors at the time said, "Hey, Paul, do you want to hire Carrie Oliphant full-time or part-time?" And I said, "Well, what other choices do I have?" And he said, "You don't." So I went home that night. I call my wife Toots, Sarah, I call her Toots.
Yeah.
And I said, "Toots, I just hired my first employee today." And I was so excited. Well, as a young wife, guess what her first question was?
How much is that going to cost us?
That's right. What are you going to pay her? How much is it going to cost? And I said, 36 grand. And she said, "Well, last year we made $50,000. You're going to pay Carrie 36. That doesn't leave us very much to live off of."
Yeah.
Well, Phil, guess what happened?
You increase production.
3 times our production.
Wow.
And so at that same time, I read E-Myth, which is arguably one of the greatest business books of all time by Michael Gerber. And he talks about most small businesses fail because the business owner tries to do it all.
Mm.
And so I also at that same time qualified for MDRT, Million Dollar Roundtable, top 5% of professionals in the world. And I remember hearing one of the speakers there talk about MDRT qualifiers, top 5% in the world, spent 50% of their time face to face with clients.
Yeah.
But court of the table, which is 3 times MDRT, guess how much time they spent face to face with clients?
80%.
Only 55.
55.
So a small difference had 3 times the impact.
Yeah.
But this was the game changer. He said, top of the table, the best of the best, 6 times the production of an MDRT qualifier, spent only 60% of their time face to face with clients.
Wow.
Little things make a huge difference. Little things make all the difference.
Yeah.
So I remember between that book and that speech at MDRT, I had one job. My one job was to build amazing relationships with amazing people,
Yep.
and my team was going to do everything else.
Yeah.
And so I've become a master delegator since 1998.
Yeah.
And so now we have this team of 14. And one of my favorite quotes is Steve Jobs said, "Don't hire really smart people and tell them what to do. Partner with really smart people and do what they say." So Phil, on my team of 14, I'm honestly, and this is including 2 college interns, by the way, on our team of 14, I'm literally the 13th smartest person. So we've been blessed because, one, the men and women we get to work with, it is a blessing and honor. Who we work with, who we get to serve, the families, we get to live vicariously through these amazing relationships. In fact, like, I'm getting goosebumps. Saturday, ironically, was Carrie Oliphant's niece's graduation party.
Wow.
I saw Carrie, employee number 1, patient 0, on Saturday. Saturday was also her grandmother's 94th birthday.
Wow.
So this past Saturday, I had an opportunity to see 5 generations of that family in one room.
That's amazing.
How amazing is that?
Yeah.
So just being a part of families like that for years, 20 some years, I mean, how do you put a price tag on that?
Yeah. So there's been a common theme throughout your story, and that is just the dedication and the, I'm not going to turn back mindset. And part of me just wonders, Paul, as I think about that, you came from humble beginnings, tough background. You had the opportunity to see what else is possible. And my guess is you said, I don't want to have to go back to the lifestyle that I was raised in. So talk a little bit about maybe, having, I don't know if I'd call it chip on the shoulder, but that idea of I've got this burning passion because I've been somewhere and I want to make sure that my kids don't go back to that, or they don't have to ever experience that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of my best clients I spoke to last week, and he's an amazing human being, loves his family. And he always said, man, Paul, if we did 10 million of revenue, I wouldn't know what to do with myself.
Hmm.
Well, this year they did 120 million of revenue. And he always says that the fear of failure is a powerful motivator.
Yeah.
And so again, I eliminated that by just saying failure was not an option.
Yep.
Now, Phil, do you know what the most frequent command in the entire Bible is?
Thou shalt not fear.
That's right. 366 times, ironically, one for every day. That's not a coincidence.
Right.
Fear not.
Yeah.
And so it's very simple. My wife and I made a decision. We have a choice. We can live by fear or we can live by faith. And so I believe with all my heart, again, Galatians 6:9, if we do the right thing, it's not always going to be, as you said, rainbows and butterflies. It's not always going to be easy, but probability, statistics, I'm a math guy. Statistics say if we do the right thing for the right reasons, we'll be blessed more than we could ever possibly imagine. Zig Ziglar, I love Zig Ziglar. He used to always say, if I help enough people get whatever they want from this life, I'll be blessed more than I could ever imagine. And that's how we've lived our life, by those principles. Everyone talks about the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, but nobody does it. So I stole this from Hall of Fame quarterback Kurt Warner, which, by the way, if you haven't watched American Underdog yet, it's like an amazing movie. And I took this from his biography I read a few years ago, the Werner rule: treat others better than you want to be treated.
Wow.
And so my family, our practice, we've all lived by that principle.
I love it. Well, Paul, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story and the journey that you have been on to get where you're at. There's so many amazing things that you've done. Anything else that you'd want to highlight with our time together?
Well, I just appreciate your time. One, I go back to the decisions we make in this life and those inflection points that change everything.
Yeah.
And as I look back, number one, coming to the Lord, accepting Jesus as my Lord and Savior, biggest game-changing decision I've ever made. Number two, I always ask my kids, you know what the second most important decision you'll ever make is?
Who you marry.
That's right. Who you choose to spend your life with. And I have been blessed. Sarah and I will be married 25 years this December. Somebody I've had a crush on since we were 11, and now 5 kids, an amazing life. It would have never been the same without her. And then number 3 is who you spend your time with.
Yep.
You are who you hang with. And so, one of the best quotes I heard was again in 1998. The person you'll be in 5 years depends on only 2 things: the books you read and the people you associate with. So I am very intentional about what I read and who I spend my time with. And I'm grateful for spending time with you this afternoon.
Well, I appreciate your time. And Paul, the only promise you have to make me is we'll probably have to do this again in like 3 or 5 years with the trajectory you're on, and we'll redo this and highlight all the pivotal moments again.
Done. Lord willing, I can't wait.